Lesson 6, Building a Bridge.
Hello, class. But today we're talking about building a bridge. Making friends with unbelievers, and a couple of things I want to re-emphasize with you is that really this is not about just making friends with unbelievers for the sake of evangelism, but actually loving them, actually caring about them, listening to them. Listening and caring is the most important kind of bridge that we can have to our unbelieving friends and neighbors and friends, to really care about them. Some Christians are guilty of what I call scalp hunting. That is, that they tend to look at an unbeliever mainly simply as an object of evangelism. We don't want to do that. We really want to care about them. We also need to point out that the idea of bringing up the subject of faith with an unbeliever is something we need to be doing with care. We seldom will we have a chance to do it abruptly. We first of all need to build a connection, build a bridge. And that's difficult for us as well, because as we think about building friendships with unbelievers, sometimes it's hard to move into the area of faith. And so we're going to be talking about how we bring a conversation around to the area of faith. We should cross that bridge gently, and we should cross it with full understanding of what we're doing, on both on our side and on the side of the unbeliever. Most Christians experience discomfort when they try to do this. That's natural. That's why we want to give you some instructions on how to build that bridge and how to cross that bridge. We must be careful, though, not to wait too long to do it. People really want to talk about deeper spiritual matters, and we want to talk about them, and we shouldn't try to put it off forever. We should bring up the subject. Now, how do we build that bridge? I'm going to give you 3 models of how we can bring up the subject of spiritual matters. Those 3 models are the conversational, the interrogative, and the incarnational approach. Let's talk first about the incarnational approach. Now, I believe the incarnational approach is actually the best way of doing it, but it's also the hardest, and it's the one that that often doesn't get done.
The incarnational bridge looks like this. It means modeling Christ in our lives, actually living out the life of Christ in front of people. In this way, other people become interested in what we have, and they ask us, and therefore they bridge into the subject of spiritual things. The advantage to this is that it is Christ's preferred model. This is the way Christ lived. Most people came to Christ and asked him about his faith, not the other way around. Our lives in this way create authentic interest in the interest. We become in the subject. We become the bait that draws other people to Jesus. The disadvantages of this approach are that it may lead to laziness about sharing our faith. We may think that just simply living in front of people is enough. And it means, of course, that we must really live the faith in front of people.
The second approach we have to sharing our faith is what's called the conversational approach. Now, the conversational approach means that simply we bring the subject around in our conversation with people. And there's a lot of different ways that we can bring up the subject of faith. One of the best ways is simply by being thankful. By looking around when things are happening to us and saying, thank God that this happened. Isn't it a wonderful thing what God is doing in our life? I've had a wonderful experience, and I thank God for it. I'd like to tell you about it. Being appreciative about things. I thank God for you, my friend. This brings up spiritual matters in a way that is non-threatening to the unbeliever. And it's a natural bridge to be able to talk more about the God to whom we are thankful. An unbeliever may not acknowledge the presence of God, but they still are thankful for the kindnesses of things that are done for them. And they appreciate thankfulness in other people. This gives them a chance to bring it up. Another way that we can do that is simply by being prayerful. When an unbeliever, or when anybody shares with us a need or concern, we can always say, can I pray for you? Would you mind if I prayed for you right now? This brings up the subject of spiritual matters in a way that's helpful to people. Most people will be thankful for the fact that you're willing to pray for them. And they will allow you to pray for them, regardless of what they may think about the efficacy of prayer. They just appreciate somebody who cares. And this is another way that you can bridge that gap. Another way is by being proud of our testimony. You know, when something good happens to us, like we have a new baby or we get married or we get a promotion at the job, we naturally talk about it. Say, isn't that a wonderful thing? Well, we can naturally talk about the things that God does in our life. Oh, let me tell you about this great church I'm going to. Let me tell you about this experience I had with God. To be proud about it. We don't need to be ashamed of the experience in our lives, but we can share those things with our friends, even our unbelieving friends, and they will appreciate it simply for the fact that we do it, provided we do it with taste and we do it with dignity and in a non-threatening manner. They will appreciate hearing what we have. In fact, many unbelievers will wonder why we don't share more if it's so important to us. We don't need to keep our testimonies to ourselves. We need to share it. Now, the next week we're going to talk about testimonies. But this testimonies is a very good way of getting into a conversation about God. Another way we can do it is simply through unashamed worship. Prayer before meals in a restaurant. Reading the Bible at our workplace or workstation. Actually showing signs of devotion in our life. Bring up the subject with people and they may wonder, well, what are you doing? Why do you have prayer before meals or whatever? But it's a good way of bringing up the conversation. Don't hide your spirituality. Don't hide your relationship to God. But your relationship to God itself can be a way of building up a conversation with other people. Sometimes the opportunity comes up to invite an unbeliever to worship. Say, hey, look, we're having something great down at our church. Would you like to come to it? Most people will not object to that. Even if they say no, they won't object to being asked. In fact, they'll be flattered that you invited them. So don't be afraid to invite people in to worship.
The conversational bridge looks like this. We naturally share in our conversation our prayers, joys, testimony, and worship. The advantages are that the unbeliever is drawn in without pressure. The disadvantages are that it may not be direct enough for some people.
Another way of bringing up the subject or bridging the gap is through the questioning approach. Simply ask the questions, open-ended questions, to bring up a religious conversation. Ask a person if you've got a good relationship with them, and you can ask them, tell me what God means to you. What do you think of the church? Do you attend church? Or even are you a Christian? Just ask them that question. But make the question open-ended. Don't make it accusatory, like, why don't you go to church? Or why don't you think you ought to attend church? Just simply ask the question, why are you a Christian? Put it in a way that they can answer it and make it in a non-threatening manner. Have you ever wondered why we came here? How we came to be on this earth? What would you change in your life if you could change something? Is a good question, because it is not overtly spiritual, but it really is in its basis spiritual. The interrogative method is a direct method. It moves the conversation along very easily and very well. And it is simple and it is frequently effective. We need to be careful, though, in using this method because we don't want to be threatening with it. If a conversational method is a little bit like fishing. We're throwing out bait to see if people will engage in the conversation. But it can be like trapping an animal, and if a person feels cornered, they resent it. So don't corner people. Just simply throw out the invitation to talk through good, open-ended questions. It's best not to get too personal with people that don't yet learn to trust you. Build a relationship before you begin to build that interrogative bridge. It's also good, whenever we ask those questions, to make sure that they have an opportunity for escape, and make sure that we're willing to listen to whatever answer they may give you to that question. Don't just sit back and ask the question and then rush ahead. Use your listening skills that we talked about in a previous lesson. Use those to develop a relationship with this person and show that you care about them. And then prove that through the interrogative questions that you ask. One common mistake is for people to try to pick the fruit before it's ripe. To try to rush into a religious conversation when they may not be ready for it. build a bridge, earn the right to ask those questions, to get into a deeper conversation about God.
The interrogative or questioning bridge looks like this. The unbeliever is asked open-ended questions about their faith in order to get them to talk about spiritual things. The advantage to this approach is that they are given a chance to share first with us, opening the door then for us to share with them. The disadvantages are that it may turn off some suspicious unbelievers.
The incarnational approach is simply this. We live out our faith, and people begin to wonder why we are changed. Jesus seldom had to move a conversation around to the subject of faith. People brought it to him because they saw something in his life that was so different that they wondered what it was. They said, what's different about this man? And they brought up spiritual matters to him. The incarnational approach means that we live a life so devoted to Christ, so devoted to loving others, that other people approach us and talk to us about it. The Spirit of God is so evident in our lives that other people want to know what our secret is. This happened to Jesus all the time, and it should happen to us. But in order to live the incarnational approach, in order to have that, we actually have to have lives that are so different and so loving that people want to know what it is that we have. Again, we have to be careful with this approach, because some people will use the idea of saying I witness with my life as an excuse for never witnessing at all. We need to verbalize our faith with people. We need to be able to explain it. But we also need to live lives that are so exemplary that other people will ask us what is different about us. And that requires a commitment to holiness and a commitment to love that many Christians really do not have. Nevertheless, we should. And I believe the incarnational approach is the best approach. The last thing I want to talk about in this lesson is rejection, because this happens frequently. Many times people say, look, I'm not interested in talking about that right now. How do we handle rejection? Well, first of all, recognize that rejection is a normal part of sharing your faith. Jesus was rejected. He said it in John. He said, if you rejected me, they'll reject you. If they listen to me, they're going to listen to you. And the truth is that nobody gets 100% interest. You're going to have rejection. It's important to learn how to deal with rejection. I was reading recently about a man who was learning how to be a salesman, and he deliberately asked people to say no to him just so he could get used to saying no. Maybe we need to be learning how to respond to rejection, and that no is frequently the answer. There's nothing wrong with that. When it comes to reaching Jesus for Christ, though, we remember that there are more allies that we have, stronger allies than enemies. Greater is he that is in you than he that is in the world. Don't be afraid of rejection, because God will work within it. But realize the allies that we have. That first of all, we have the Holy Spirit. The Holy Spirit opens doors where he will, and he is already preparing the people to whom you witness. Remember, if a person rejects what you say, they're not rejecting you. They're rejecting the Lord. And we don't need to be afraid of that rejection, because it's not really a personal rejection at all. It's a rejection of the gospel, and that's not up to you. But remember also that in addition to the Holy Spirit, you have other allies. For example, you have the ally of their own hearts, because, as Kepler put it, there's a God-shaped hole inside of everybody that's waiting to be filled. People have inside of them a desire for God. They just don't know it yet. And as you share, you help to build that desire. It's amazing to me how many people really want to know more about the Lord and want to know more about spirituality if they believe that you're a trusting individual who they can talk with. They'll talk to you about it. So have that. Moving a discussion from earthly things to heavenly things is risky, but it's also the only way that you can bring about the fruit of salvation in people's lives. We have to be willing to take the chance and do it.